Animorphs fans, and welcome back to the Animorphs universe. We're talking about the Mountain Taxxon Rebels in today's AniLysis episode, and it comes from the Andalite Chronicles. I was expecting it to be quite a long AniLysis, but actually, it's not going to be, I don't think. There might be a fair bit of discussion, but really the Mountain Taxxon Rebels don't really do much. But before we get too deep into that, how are they introduced? What is the context for their existence in the Animorphs series, specifically the Andalite Chronicles? Well, Alran, Elfangor and Arbron arrive on this planet, the Taxxon homeworld, and they morph Taxxons to get around secretive, but they get separated. And Elfangor bumps into Esplin, who currently is, I think it's Subvisa 7. And this is where the Mountain Taxxon Rebels are first told to us about. Let's see the quote. The Subvisa laughed.
So, you want to resist me? Good. I need the entertainment. It's rather dull being in charge of security for this sector. I suppose you're one of the rebels? One of those Mountain Taxxons who refused to join the Empire? Well, we'll get to the truth quickly enough.
Mountain Taxxons? Rebels? I was so surprised I temporarily forgot to be terrified. There were still Taxxons resisting the Yeerks? This would be huge news to my people. We'd assumed all the Taxxons had accepted Yeerk rule in exchange for promises of fresh, unusual meats. Esplin tells Elfangor about these Mountain Taxxons and that they aren't aligned with the Yeerk Empire, which comes as a surprise to Elfangor. Why no Andalites know about this? I suppose just because they're actually quite bigoted and they just assume, oh, all the Taxxons must have joined them, every single one of them. They don't have minds of their own. That's just the way the Andalites tend to be. But that's a discussion for another day. And this is the point where we find out what the Yeerk Empire does when they come across some of these Taxxon rebels.
Rebels are just fresh meat,
Subvisa 7 said calmly.
but being a Taxxon, you understand. Any rebels we catch go to feed loyal Taxxons. It's sad, really, but I have no choice. It's one of the idiotic regulations I have to deal with. It's all part of the deal with the Taxxons. Any suspect Taxxon is turned over to loyal Taxxons for interrogation. Of course, Taxxons don't really interrogate. They don't have the patience for it. They ask one or two questions, then it's dinner time.
As you'd expect, when the Yeerks come across some of these rebel Taxxons, they just sort of feed them to the loyal Taxxons. So the rebel Taxxons don't really get a say in much going on. We don't know the numbers that they operate in or anything like that, but that's as much information we get up to that point. We then skip forward a little bit to where we actually come in contact with the Mountain Taxxon Rebels, because for its credit, the Andalite Chronicles doesn't just give us that and then leave it alone and never... Lila, please. The Andalite Chronicles doesn't just show it to us and never deliver on it. They actually do deliver on the Mountain Taxxon Rebels. Whether it's satisfying or not is debatable. Anyway, Elfangor finds Arbron, and it turns out that Arbron has overstayed his welcome in his own Taxxon morphs, and he's now a Taxxon Nothlit. Elfangor and Arbron have found the Skritnar ship that has the Time Matrix, and they've gotten past the Ged guards, taken the ship and flew it away. But they get chased down by some Yeerk fighters, and there's a bit of a dog... Well, not so much a dogfight, just more of an escape. And there is a crash landing. That is where we now rejoin, and where we find the Mountain Taxxon Rebels. They've flown out hundreds of miles, and this is what happens. Arbron! They were his tracks. Had to be. And yet, no. There had been more than one Taxxon. 3, 4 of us. 5 sets altogether. And then I saw 2 additional signs. A set of wandering, insect-like tracks, and the evidence of something large being dragged away. The Skrit, I said. Okay, so Taxxons came, they took Arbron away, and the Skrit, and maybe the 2 cocoon Skrit. I glanced at the spot where I'd been lying unconscious. They had to have seen me, smelled me, and yet I was still alive. They have Arbron, I realised. And yet why hadn't they taken me? And the time matrix. Surely Taxxon controllers would not have done that. I recalled Subvisa 7's reference to Mountain Taxxons, Taxxons who refused to submit to Yeerk control, and I felt just the faintest glimmer of hope. If these had been Yeerk-controlled Taxxons, they'd have taken the time matrix. And me. Elfangor correctly anticipates that it is the Mountain Taxxon Rebels that have taken Arbron. How he just assumes that is beyond me, really, because who knows where they've flown to on the planet. There's a whole planet. So it is correct that the Mountain Taxxons took Arbron, but it's not until later we find that out. Elfangor goes around the Squitnar ship and looks for something, and he finds a Mustang, and he gets his Dr. Pepper and his Mustang and drives out across the desert that is the Taxxon home world. And that's when he stumbles across the Hive, the Taxxon Rebels. Very conveniently. That's when the ground beneath my wheels simply opened up. Vroom! Ah! Boom, boom! The Mustang tumbled and rattled down a steep, rough slope, a dirt ramp that led straight down into darkness. Of course, out of the entire planet, Elfangor manages to drive his Mustang right over the Mountain Taxxon Rebel base, and the ground opens up beneath him, and in he goes. And then this is what he describes the Taxxon Hive looking like. This is where the Mountain Taxxon Rebels live. I was in a vast underground cavern. Dominating the centre of the cavern was a sort of hill or small mountain. It was the mountain that glowed. It glowed a dim but unmistakable red. From this irregular glowing hill came tendrils, each perhaps 3 or 4 feet in diameter. As my eyes adjusted, I could see that there were a dozen or more of these tendrils, and that each one extended to the edge of the cavern and then kept going into the rock itself. The tendrils too glowed a dim red. I realised that I could see things moving inside the tendrils. The tendrils were hollow. They were tubes, each about as big around as a Taxxon. I saw them then. My eyes finally pierced the darkness and saw the Taxxons. Dozens, no, hundreds. They swarmed around and over the glowing red mountain. As I watched, I saw holes open in the sides of the tunnel tendrils. Out crawled more Taxxons. They had to see me. They couldn't help but see me. And yet none moved to attack me. Instead, they busied themselves pushing dirt and rock back into place to fill the space my Mustang had created. This is what we can probably assume most Taxxon hives are like. Now, I will cover the Taxxon hive thing in a separate analysis. We're just focusing on the group of Taxxons today. But I will just say that this is probably a normal habitat, and this is what the Mountain Taxxon Rebels live in, but it's nothing too out of the usual for Taxxons in general. But yeah, that's for another analysis some other time, so keep tuning in. Anyway, moving on. These Mountain Rebel Taxxons are in their hundreds, and they're just zooming around with the help of this hive thing. And this, of course, is where we find that Arbron was taken in by these Taxxons.
Is this the creature?
Ah! I screamed. The voice in my head was huge, massive. I grabbed my head with my hands. It was like hearing a planet speak. It was only then, as I staggered under the psychic blow, that I realised it. The Red Mountain was alive. I heard a different thought-speak voice.
Yes, that's him, Arbron said. He is called Elfangor.
One Taxxon came slithering toward me, out of the mass of bodies around the base of the Red Mountain. It moved clumsily. 2 rows of legs were shorter than the others.
Arbron? Yes, Elfangor. It's me.
He waved one Taxxon claw toward the massive, glowing mountain.
The living hive. Light of the Taxxons. Mother and father of the Taxxons. The hive has lost many of its children to the Yeerks. Many of its servants have betrayed the hive and made an alliance with the Yeerks. But the living hive is still the mother and father of the species.
Arbron, what are you talking about? Have they done something to you? Then he laughed. The old Arbron laugh again, for just a moment.
Have they done something to me? Well, they didn't eat me, if that's what you mean. The Taxxons who found us after we crashed wanted to eat us both, but I gave them the scrit instead. I had no choice. And then the living hive learned what I was, It drew me here. We're hundreds of miles from where we landed. How did you get here? You couldn't possibly have walked. The living hive's tunnels extend thousands of miles, Elfangor. There is suction in the tunnels. A Taxxon has only to fold back its legs, and the pressure draws it swiftly down the tunnel, as the hive commands.
Basically, the living hive sucked Arbron, well, not so much sucked Arbron, well, yeah, it did suck Arbron down, pushed them to this place for a specific reason. And then Elfangor finds out that he was sort of brought there for a specific reason as well. Arbron, what's going on? It wasn't an accident that the ground opened up beneath me. Did the living hive want me here for some reason?
Yes, Elfangor. The hive is angry.
At me? I asked, feeling my guts turn over several times.
The living hive is tired of losing its children to the Yeerks. The living hive has long sought a way to destroy the Yeerk invaders and remove them from this planet. But the hive could not understand the Yeerks and their machines. Now the hive has an advisor, someone who understands machines, spaceships, Dracon beams, someone who will help the hive destroy the Yeerks and their traitor Taxxons.
I stared at Arbron.
You?
He laughed, but this time there was no mirth.
What better future could I have, Elfangor? I'm a Taxxon now. And now I am preparing for a surprise attack on the spaceport. The hive will send 1,000 of her children with me. I will lead a Taxxon rebellion.
Notice, by the way, that this is the Mountain Taxxon Rebels hideout. And they basically don't do anything. They're just sort of vaguely in the background. It's all about the living hive. So I anticipated this being a longer analysis, but really the Taxxons don't feature. They really don't. It's all about Arbron and the living hive, and yeah. Also, the fact that Elfangor asks, was I brought down here for a reason? And Arbron says, yes, but we're not going to tell you why. I'm the reason. God damn it, Andalite Chronicles, you really are a crap book, but it gets worse. Let's not get too carried away. Let's figure out what the point of all this is.
We attack tonight. The living hive is pushing her tunnels closer to the spaceport. 1,000 Taxxons will pour from the ground, surprising the Yeerks and all their creatures.
I imagined that moment. 1,000 huge, hungry worms erupting amid technological cathedrals of the ship's cradles, erupting amidst Taxxon controllers and Hork-Bajir controllers. You'll lose, I said.
We know, Arbron said, but even a Taxxon has a right to control its own planet. Even a Taxxon has a right to resist an invader.
But you can't win, I said flatly. Aren't lost causes sometimes the best causes, Elfangor? Arbron had become a general. He was just what the living hive needed. He could explain what the Taxxons would find when they erupted into the spaceport. He could explain how to hurt the Yeerks. So unfortunately for the Mountain Taxxon Rebels, this utter dweeb Arbron has been made their general. Not a single one of the Mountain Taxxon Rebels, they've lived there their entire lives. They probably all know each other to some degree, as much as Taxxons can really know each other. And they are intelligent. They are actually intelligent. They don't speak a language we can at all recognise, but they are known to be intelligent. And not a single one of them, apparently, is good enough to be leading this group. Apparently some complete stranger, this dweeb from another world that no one's ever seen before, he comes down and they're immediately like, you're our guy. You know this planet better than we do. God damn it, this book is dreadful. Dreadful. That's all I can really say about the Mountain Taxxon Rebels at this point. The fact that they're just so irrelevant that, as soon as a stranger comes along, that stranger is now in charge of them all. They're just basically mindless drones. Not one of them says anything. Not one of them does anything specific. We just get told that there are lots of Taxxons there. Those are the Mountain Taxxon Rebels, the ones we introduced earlier in the book and made a bit of a big deal about. That's all they do, they just exist. Barely even mention that they do exist, they just exist. And Arbron gets put in charge of them. Great. Also, I find it incredibly entertaining and infuriating simultaneously. Arbron says the Hive wants to get rid of the Yeerks that have plagued its planet. You know, it wants to get them out of there, bring back the planet for the Taxxons. So what's your plan, Arbron, as the newly elected general? Mass suicide. Will that work? No! And all the while, the Living Hive is standing there listening to this, thinking, what have I done? Just gets a gun and you've been hired for a reason, to help the Living Hive figure out how to get rid of the Yeerks. And you're the general, and you're just going to, right in front of him, say, you know what, we are screwed and we're just going to kill ourselves. What's the Hive going to do? Just brilliant speech, mate. But no, he goes on with it because obviously this is a largely irrelevant subplot, and it's all about just finding some weird way for Elfangor to get back to the spaceport while also allowing him to have his moment driving the Mustang and having a fighter chase across the desert. I hate this book! And remember, by the way, that the Andalite Chronicles is split into 3 distinct sections. I'm talking specifically about the second section, Alaran's Choice. It truly is one of the worst, it is close to book 37 for being utterly, utterly awful in every conceivable way. It is so, so bad. I don't think this is even the worst of it. Anyway, this is the point where Elfangor says, well, what do I do? And Arbron just says, oh, just drive your Mustang through that tube and we'll take you back to the spaceport where you started, making this whole thing entirely irrelevant. Alright then.
I have some last-minute planning. We've put that yellow machine of yours in one of the tubes. You'll go last, after all our people have been sent. Drive straight down the tunnel. The tunnel is part of the Hive. It will make sure you get to the right place. And one last thing. Yes? The spaceport will be hell, he said flatly. You won't be able to tell the difference between my Taxxons and Taxxon controllers, so don't hesitate. Do what you have to. The launch of the attack was eerie to watch. Taxxons lined up alongside the tunnels. The Living Hive glowed a brighter red, and swiftly, smoothly, the Taxxons shoved through the slits in the tunnels and were blown down the tubes. Look, there they are, the Mountain Taxxons. See, they were briefly mentioned. Just sort of vaguely leaving to go kill themselves. Okay, so Elfangor waits until the last moment, and then he shoots off in his Mustang through this tube, and whoa, he arrives at the scene of utter destruction and chaos. Taxxon cries, Hork-Bajir roars, the tsew-tsew of Dracon beams. Scenes of nauseating violence were everywhere. The battle had already raged for half an hour. Half an hour of unarmed Taxxons against bladed Hork-Bajir. It was a slaughterhouse. So this battle between the Yeerk forces and the Mountain Taxxon Rebels begins. And Elfangor uses that opportunity to sort of drive around a bit aimlessly and then head for the Jahar, where the 2 humans, Lauren and Chapman, are being held. And that's where Arbron's gone too. So this all sort of culminates in this bit with the Jahar, and these are the quotes. The Jahar. All I could do was head for the Jahar. The lovely ship stood proud above the slaughter, and there, atop the ship's cradle, clearly silhouetted by the lights, were 2 strange alien shapes. 2 aliens that walked on 2 legs alone, without tail. The humans. Seething around the base of the ship's cradle were 100 Taxxons, all pushing and shoving to squeeze up the narrow ramp that led to the ship itself. Arbron! I screamed, as I slammed the Mustang into the mass of ravening Taxxons. Elfangor, I can't hold them any longer. Are these Taxxon controllers, or are they your soldiers? There's no difference anymore, Elfangor. Don't you see? Blood has been spilled. The hunger, the hunger. Stop me, Elfangor. Stop me. And with that, Arbron, Arist of the dome ship's Star Sword, lost his last shred of control. He turned from facing down the Taxxon mob. He turned and ran for the humans, mouth gaping open. So this battle culminates in bollocks. And why do I say that? So what sets the Taxxon off? Blood being spilt. Who are the only 2 people in this whole thing who presumably are not bleeding? The 2 humans. So why is Arbron suddenly going for them?
Ugh! Get on the floor, AniLysis Chronicles. You've wound me right up now. This whole scene of blood in front of him. I need blood! Turn around and go for the oh, whatever. I can't even make it funny making fun of it. It's just cringe. Yeah, Elfangor then steps in and then it all gets stopped. The whole thing just stops. The whole Taxxon rebellion just sort of stops when Esplin comes along. Behind me, I saw the Taxxons falling back, and over them climbed and leaped a handful of Hork-Bajir warriors. I realised I knew one of the Hork-Bajir. It was Sub-Visser 7.
Ah, so we meet again, AniLysis, he said, sounding delighted. Elfangor, right? That was the name you yelled so defiantly at me as you escaped. I was so afraid the Taxxons might have gotten you by now, and I so wanted you all for myself.
Why have I included that quote? Because it just seems very irrelevant, and it sort of is, but it also isn't, because that's truly where the whole Mountain Taxxon Rebel thing just stopped. Nothing happened of it. The poor old Taxxons. I understand that Michael Grant and Catherine Applegate were planning a Taxxon Chronicles book. And maybe it was definitely due, because every time they tried to develop the Taxxons in some way, it just fails. I mean, look at this, for example, and look at book 53, heading into 54, where you get this new Taxxon rebellion plot going on, and Arbron's in charge of that one as well. And look how ineffective that was as well. It was just a red herring, just as it has been here as well, where you think it's this big thing, but you don't even get told what happens to the rebels. It's just sort of like, oh, we're moving on to the next thing now. Bored of them. Just bring Esplin in, and move along, and that's just what it feels like. You know, the whole Mountain Taxxon Rebel thing could have just not been included in this book. Because what happens? Elfangor and Arbron, they take the Skritnar ship, fly it out with their little fighter chase scene, and it crash lands, and they rejoin in the Mountain Taxxon Rebel base with the Living Hive, and then they get shot back to the base where they started, and head for the Jahar, and get intercepted by the Future Visser 3, and it gets taken from there. What out of all that do we gain? What do we learn? Oh, we do learn that Arbron gets involved with rebellious Taxxons, but again, is that necessary? Because fast forward all the way to book 53, and Arbron just appears among a group of new Taxxons. It's not the same Taxxons because they just got slaughtered. They all just committed suicide en masse, with Arbron apparently being the only exception. I mean, there could have been more exceptions, but largely they were just, they just got either absorbed into the baying mob of Taxxons, or they just got slaughtered by Hork-Bajir. So yeah, in book 53, it's basically a new group of Taxxons. Arbron is there, but doesn't really do anything there either. It's just, poor old Taxxons just don't get a break, do they? They don't get anything. That as soon as the authors try, let's give the Taxxons something, it's just bollocks, isn't it? It's just bollocks. But to be fair, I'm not surprised, because you can't really work with Taxxons, can you? And I'm not talking about physically, you probably could, like, work alongside one. I'm talking from a literary point of view. It's very hard to work with the Taxxons, other than them just being these ravenous worms. You can't exactly give too much personality to them. At least none that we can relate to as humans. But yeah, the Mountain Taxxon Rebel storyline barely gets going and didn't really end either. It just sort of disappeared. Much like the killer asteroids that appear later on, they just sort of vanish. God damn this book. This book is written like it was written by someone with severe ADHD. Like, it just can't keep focused on anything that's going on. And it's weird because none of the other books written by the main authors are really like that. It's like this book. You got, oh, we're going to start a chapter doing this thing. Oh no, we got to go to the next thing. Next thing. There's no time for any of it to breathe sufficiently. And it's all a chaotic mess. That's how I would describe the Andalite Chronicles. But we're not here to discuss that. We're here to discuss the Mountain Taxxon Rebels. Problem is, they don't do anything. So what am I supposed to say? We know what they do. They are there in the background, and then they commit mass suicide by jumping into the Earth base. What else can I say? That can't be covered in the Living Hive's very own AniLysis later on down the line, because I've got to remember, I can't say too much about that, because that's going to be its own separate AniLysis. I'm talking specifically about the group of Taxxons, of which we barely see. So, yeah, this video isn't as long as I thought it might be. It's been a lot rantier than it probably ought to be, and I'm starting to think that maybe I should just move on. This, by the way, is a perfect illustration by Ghost of Essam of the Mountain Taxxon Rebels. There really aren't any. At least there shouldn't be. So, yeah, Ghost of Essam's actually captured the Mountain Taxxon Rebels very well there. How do you do it? I don't understand how art works. Anyway, I'm bored of the Mountain Taxxon Rebels now. Honestly, they could just bugger off out of the series. I don't think anyone would really care. Probably one of the worst. I should rate it actually. Best and worst factions of the Animorphs series, and the Mountain Taxxon Rebels are probably going to be in the bottom 5. Anyway, it's just going to turn into more ranting. So let's just decide what the next AniLysis is, shall we? So what do we have here today? We've got everything from book 1 through book 29. Because I am now about to listen to the audiobook for Elfangor's Secret. That'll be my next one. So basically everything up to but not including this one. Okay? So it could be anything from the Animorphs town, the hometown of the Animorphs, the other wolf pack, the loose leopard, all the way down to the collaborator. Oh, what fun. What's it going to be? Spin Spoodly and spin the wheel. What's it going to be? Axe's Scoop. That could be fun, couldn't it? There won't really be any need to draw a diagram of the layout because it is just a hole in the ground, but we'll see what's in there and what goes on in the scoop. Does that sound fun to you? Sounds fun to me. More fun than the Mountain Taxxon Rebels, I'm sure. Well, yeah, Axe's Scoop. Be there or be square, okay? Somewhere else in the Animorphs universe. Ta-ra!